The Effects of Child Abuse and Neglect is brought to you by Texel, your credit union, with locations in Temple, Belton, and Killeen. Visit us at texel.org.
May the face of the Lord shine on you. May He shower His blessing on all that you do. May you never know anguish, sorrow, or strife. Dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of your life.
Howdy, I'm Sue Ellen Jackson from Aware Central, Texas, and this is Effects of Child Abuse and Neglect. You're going to want to stay with us. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to share. We have testimonies from folks that have survived child abuse and neglect. We have one very special lady whose name is Lisa, who struggles every day of her life with her legacy of child abuse and neglect, and she's a mommy now, and she spent some time with us sharing her story so that she can help other folks out there get through their nightmare of their history of abuse and neglect. We also have a testimony from a gentleman named Greg who had a rough childhood, but he's overcome it, and he's going to share with us how he did that. So go get a cup of coffee or a glass of tea and sit down with us for a few minutes. I think it's going to really be worth your while. I have with me here a lovely lady. Her name is Sheila Brown, and she is from, let me see if I get this right, State of Texas Department of Family Protective Services, the Child Protective Services Division. Is that right, Sheila?
That's correct.
So thank you for being here. What we're going to be looking at specifically for the next few minutes is we're going to help you understand what we mean by child abuse and neglect. I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but maybe I saw it on TV. I think it's real. It may not be. So, but the American Indians, when they were attacking the pioneers, the women would hide underneath or go and hide, and they would pop their children on the noses really hard so that they wouldn't cry. Have you ever heard that?
I've heard that.
Well, you know, I don't know if it's true or not, but we would say, oh, that's child abuse. So child abuse and neglect, understanding what it is, I think is really critical before we go into this whole series. Cultures have different beliefs, and what they perceive as neglect, we don't, and vice versa. So Sheila, one of the things that you're going to do today is help us understand what the state of Texas, or even, is it federal law or is it just state law that we'll be talking about?
We'll be talking about state of Texas law.
Okay, so what we're going to look at is specifically the state of Texas laws that tell us legally when you've stepped over that line and now you're abusing, because you can be just a bad parent and there's still effects to that, or you can actually be abusing your children, and if the law catches up with you, you're going to face the consequences, right?
Well, when we look at child and abuse and neglect, and most of the times, the biggest question in most communities, can I spank my child?
Right.
Some communities or people feel like that Child Protective Services says you can't spank your child.
I hear that.
But the definition of physical abuse is very clear, and it does not say that a parent cannot spank their child. We have to make an assessment on each individual basis. It's not a blanket that we know that you physically abuse your child. We have to look at all the factors. We have to look at where the child was hit, the genuine threat to injury to a child. But to just say that you can't spank your child. The Texas Family Code does not say that you cannot spank your child. As you might know, some schools still use corporal punishment.
Right, right.
So the state of Texas allows corporal punishment in the school system. So we're not saying that as Child Protective Services, you cannot spank your child. We do have to look at if it's crossed that line of abuse, as you said earlier.
Right.
We have to look at the age of the child, the severity of the injuries, where the injuries care, are they in vital parts, meaning are they in parts that can be injured. And that is so important in small children, because small children can have internal injuries that is really not known to the eye if they're hidden certain parts of their body. So
Right.
Sometimes we have to get medical profession involved to help us make that determination. We look at where the bruises are. So it's a lot of things that come into play when we're making that determination is if we consider it physical abuse or not.
Right.
The Texas Family Code clearly says for physical abuse, and I'll read it for you and then kind of go into more details. Physical injury that results in substantial harm to a child or the genuine threat of substantial harm from physical injury to a child, including an injury that is at variance with the history of explanation given and excluding an accident or reasonable discipline by a parent, guardian, or a managing possessory conservator does not expose the child to a substantial risk of harm. So even in the definition, reasonable discipline is allowed.
So that's kind of the key words, reasonable discipline. So if you have a 3-year-old and he spills his milk and you take a 2-inch wide leather belt and you beat him to where he has bruises, would you call that abuse?
That would more than likely be ruled as reason to believe, and that's one of the terms that we use.
Reason to believe.
That physical abuse did occur on that child.
Here's a question for you. Same scenario, a little 3-year-old spills his milk and this little guy doesn't get beat, but now the mother's in a rage and she curses at him and says, "You stupid, no good, I wish you were never born." And how do you grasp that? I mean, that clearly is emotional abuse, and it's I think probably has as big of an impact as the physical, but there's no evidence other than how the child grows up and how they become as they get older. How do you deal with that?
Well, one of the things that has to happen for us to even be involved is that we have to receive a referral through our hotline, and we will go out. If that referral is accepted as a priority 1 or priority 2, we will go out on that case and we will make an assessment. Emotional abuse is probably one of the hardest abuses for us to determine that it occurred.
I would think so, yeah.
Just in the definition itself, where it says from the Texas Family Code that mental or emotional injury to a child that results in an observable and material impairment in a child's growth, development, psychological functioning. And a lot of times, because you have to determine the child's, how's it going to have an impact on the child's development and growth. Right. You're not in that incident going to be able to say, because this child spilled over his milk and his mother went into a rage of screaming and hollering, that that's going to impact the child's growth. We might have the personal opinion that it might, but when we talk about emotional abuse, a lot of times we have to get psychologists involved,
right?
Because children have so many things that is impacting their growth and their development. A 3-year-old, if he in daycare, is the 3-year-old responding to something that happened in daycare with his peers, or is he responding to his mother yelling at him? Right. So we have to take all those things into consideration. And I agree with you, emotional abuse is probably the most lasting and could be the most damaging abuse that a child can have.
Yeah.
But we have to have those factors and be able to show that because of this parent's behavior, it's having an impact on this child's development and growth.
Sure.
It's impairing it.
Unfortunately, you've got to have evidence. Let's hear from Lisa. Lisa's going to be sharing her whole life story, and it's rough. And Lisa's trying to be a good mommy now, but Lisa wants to do this. She wants you to hear her story.
Child abuse and neglect looks like, to me when I was growing up, was very scary. At times I wished I was dead because I didn't know what to do. I was afraid for myself, my family. The emotional abuse that I had to deal with was very hard because I had brothers too. I have 6 brothers, and I'd see things happening to them, and I felt like I had to be a protector. You know, like I had to protect the whole family, including my mom. The sexual abuse that I was experiencing from my dad was probably one of the hardest things in my life that I ever had to deal with, because when I was growing up, from the age of 6 to 13, I was sexually abused by my dad. And that was probably one of the hardest of abuses that I had to deal with. I dealt with the neglect, the mental abuse, the emotional abuse, and the sexual abuse. But that was the hardest thing that I had to deal with because I never had anybody to really talk to as growing up, because our family's secluded, because my dad, he kind of tried to, he always told me that as long as he was sexually abusing me, that my mom wouldn't love me if I told her. And I think that was my biggest fear. It wasn't her running away. He just told me she wouldn't love me, and that was probably one of the craziest things I ever heard from him. But that was one of my biggest fears. And then I was really scared. Like at night, I knew he was going to come in. You know, I already knew it was going to happen before it happened. You know, I'd hear the door come in and open, and I would hide underneath my blanket at nighttime. I would put my mouth like that far out underneath the blanket just so that I could breathe at night, because I couldn't breathe from underneath the blanket. And it didn't matter. I wasn't safe under the blanket. I wasn't safe in the closet, no matter where I hid, under the bed. Until I was 13, I wet the bed. And after he was removed from the house, it all stopped. I didn't wet the bed no more. Everybody made fun of me growing up because of the fact that I did it, but nobody knew why. And I don't know why either. You know, I guess I was asleep, and that's when it happened. And then I would wake up and I'd be wet, and I think maybe that was part of the fear, and maybe it was trying to keep him away. And I'm wondering if that's how, things happen, And I learned, over the years through counseling and stuff, that it wasn't my fault. And I think that's why I'm able to help other people now about the sexual abuse. As other things went on through the years, I would grow up, with other abuse, and it started coming out in my own children. Not the sexual abuse, but the verbal abuse. I verbally abused my children for a very long time, and it wasn't until I met Aware Central Texas and started getting help through you guys that the abuse started stopping, where I don't yell. And I still do once in a while, but I'm not yelling like I used to. And there's other things, that I don't do now. But child abuse growing up was just a very scary thing. And I can imagine, how other children had to deal with the child abuse, because I don't understand, sometimes myself, how I made it through it. And it just was a hard thing. Very hard.
If you just saw that story about Lisa and you've been affected by child abuse and neglect, or even if you fear that maybe you're not making the best choices with parenting, please give us a call. We're not going to judge you. We're here to love and encourage and help you be the parent that you want to be. if you're somebody that's suffering and you have secrets and you just need to tell somebody something that happened to you when you were younger, give us a call at Aware Central Texas. The number is, if you have a pen, write it down. If you don't, we'll bring it up again. But the number again is 254-939-7582. Our website address is obvious, awarecentraltexas.org. You can check us out online, and all the information will be there as well. Lisa's story's rough, you know, and I still see Lisa, and we talk, and she's struggling, you know, to be a good parent. We talked earlier a little bit about the physical abuse and the emotional abuse, but what about sexual abuse? How does the state of Texas look at that? What do they say about that?
Well, sexual abuse, we look at it, the actual act that occurred, as Lisa told in her story, right. Her father having sex with her during that time. Also, sexual abuse, we look at when a parent put a child in a situation where there's a risk of them being sexually abused.
Okay, so if a mom has a boyfriend that was actually a predator looking for a vulnerable woman that has kids so that he can abuse them, then she's kind of held accountable too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We will hold her accountable also for putting her child in a situation where her child can't protect herself.
Right. What if she doesn't know? She's still responsible?
Well, if she doesn't know, at the point that she find out, well, how does she respond? What did she do to protect her child?
Right.
Did she, because sometimes we find the parents struggle with believing that their child was sexually abused. So at the moment that you discovered it, what did you do as a parent? How did you protect your child? Because one of the things that we're really looking at is the safety issues of children.
Sure.
So what did you do as a parent when you initially found out that your child was in harm's way? Did you respond appropriately? And that's what we would have to look at, because most parents don't think about that. Information is on the website. They have a lot of registered sex offenders that you can go into a website and see.
That is a good point. If you're a single mom or a single dad and you're contemplating allowing somebody into your world, you can go on a website and check to see if they have a history of being a sexual predator or sexual perpetrator. What is that website?
I always put in sex offenders to find it. I
think
don't know.
I do too. I think that's it. It's simple. Just Google sex offender, and I think it'll ask questions about what community, what area, what county.
You can do it down to zip code area.
Okay, good.
So those are the things that we look at. Really, what does the parents do once they find out that their child could be at risk of being abused?
It's just horrific, just that whole scenario, and unfortunately, it's happening all the time. I mean, there literally are men out there that are looking for that vulnerable woman with children, specifically for the purpose of abusing the children. How sad.
And one of the things that we have to realize as a community, women also abuse children.
Absolutely.
Sexually abuse children.
Yes, they do.
And we can't get enough of the word out to be aware, because sometimes we think men are the only perpetrators, as we call them, but a lot of times we'll find that women are also sexually abusing children and being inappropriate with children.
I know. And don't you think our culture has a hard time with that? I mean, why is it that we're all about men being abusers, but when you say that women sexually abuse their children, in our culture, initially people like, and we don't get that same response when you say that men are offenders. I don't know. It's just strange to me.
But if you look at the history of abuse, when abuse initially came out, we struggled with thinking that anybody would abuse children because children was known as property.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's just going through the change and accepting things in a community or in a culture that first we got to accept that abuse do occur. You'll still find communities that struggle with that children are being abused.
Oh, yeah. We see that every day. I mean, we're out there in the community trying to educate our community about the curse of child abuse that passes from generation to generation to generation. And our biggest obstacle is getting over the fact that, yes, there is abuse in our community. So once again, if you're struggling with any aspect of child abuse and neglect, please call us. That number is 254-939-7582. We've talked about emotional, physical, sexual abuse. We haven't really talked much about neglect. What does the state of Texas say about neglect?
We look at different types of neglect. We have medical neglect.
Medical neglect.
And that's where a parent is failing to provide appropriate medical care for a child.
Okay.
And sometimes that's due to poverty. Sometimes that's due to lack of follow-through, not giving all the medication. The child gets sick again. The child go back to the doctor. We receive a report that the child is still having medical issues that they shouldn't be having.
Yeah, and then of course there's the food and the shelter
and that's
issues.
what's considered as physical neglect, when you're not providing appropriate basic needs for a child. That's food, shelter, clothing. That's physical neglect. And then we have what we call neglectful supervision, where a parent,
children are just running amok and the parents aren't involved.
The parents are not involved, and the children are not appropriately supervised. And then we have refusal to accept parental responsibility, when a parent is just saying, I can't provide for this child anymore.
Okay. We have another person to hear from. His name is Greg, and let's hear what he has to say about his childhood.
My mom's world blew up the same time my dad's airplane blew up. I was 4 months old, youngest of 4 boys. Mom was left to raise us by herself. She didn't remarry, and she didn't do very well with that. She turned to drugs, she turned to alcohol, and she was a defeated woman. I knew Mother under no other circumstances than that. There were many times I'd come home as a young kid from school, and Mom was in an ambulance leaving our house to have her stomach pumped because of a drug overdose. Or I'd come home and Mom would be laying on the floor in a drunken stupor. Neglect, I guess you could say, was what I experienced as a young lad. It was tough, but it was normal. It was my normal, and I didn't know any different. And Mom loved me. I knew that too. But it was hard on her, and I don't pass judgment on her either. But she finally killed herself in a drug overdose when I was 14 years old, so I was orphaned at that time. And then I think my world began to blow up. And so for the next 10 years, it was not very pretty. I took those early years of neglect, and I kind of went inward like a turtle into a shell. It cost too much to bear my heart, and so I became like a rock. And for the next 10 years, I did things that I'm not very proud of today. Hurt people, hurt myself, did things that were not good. But I found out at the age of 24 that there was someone who really did love me, who cared for me more than I could possibly imagine. And for me, that was my Heavenly Father. I didn't have a father to raise me. He died when he was serving overseas. I didn't even know him, never even saw him. Mom gave me all the love she could, but it was limited under the circumstances. And now I had a Heavenly Father who said, I know all about you. I understand all your hurts, all your pain, and I love you anyway. And I accepted that, and He accepted me, and my life changed. I went to college, I went on to seminary, became an Army chaplain. I now work for a congressman. God is good. He turned it all around for me, and I don't think there's anyone who is out of the reach of God. No matter what your past, no matter what you've done or had done to you, there is hope. There is hope. I want you to know.
Greg is such an inspirational gentleman, and who would think that a fellow that articulate, that handsome, that altogether professional and successful had the upbringing that he did. Lesson to be learned in that, we can all move away from our legacies of child abuse and neglect. You can be the parent that you want to be. You can overcome the hardships that you're struggling that are going to impact your children. Just keep that in mind. Sheila, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you and what you're doing in CPS. And what exactly do you do there? When we called you, somebody in the background was saying, oh yay, Sheila's coming. She's really high up with CPS. And so I'm honored to have you. What is your title exactly?
I'm the Regional Director for Region 7. I'm responsible for 30 counties. And basically responsible for all stages of services.
Wow.
For Region 7 Child Protective Services. So I do a lot of things.
Yes, you do. Well, bless you for what you're doing and for caring about children in Texas. And it takes a real special person to fight those battles every single day. So I'm in your corner. So thank you very much.
And thank you for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. If you've been watching this show and you have some history of child abuse and neglect in your own back pocket, please understand that there is hope, and you can walk away from that legacy of child abuse and neglect. If you're frustrated or lonely, or if you are questioning whether you were a good parent or not, or are you a good parent now, we're there for you. All you have to do is pick up the phone, and I know sometimes that's easier said than done. Our number is 254-939-7582. You can also go on our website. It's awarecentraltexas.org, and we also have a Facebook. So check us out and understand that whatever it is that you're holding that has to do with your relationship with your parents or your relationship with your children, we're there for you, and we can help you understand and help you make better choices. And hey, we've all made mistakes, and the most important thing to know above all is that there is hope and that you don't have to live like this.
May the face of the Lord shine on you. May He shower His blessing on all that you do. May you never know anguish, sorrow, or strife. Dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of your life.
The Effects of Child Abuse and Neglect is brought to you by Texel, your credit union, with locations in Temple, Belton, and Killeen. Visit us at texel.org.